and welcome to the Rev Up Health podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about osteoporosis
and bone health.
Yeah.
So it is very important. So a lot of folks take that portion of our body for granted, and bone health is one of those that's extremely important. And we hope that we can at least shed some light on this and give you a little food for thought and something to think about. And hopefully you can come away with some ideas and things that you can do to improve your own bone health and certainly take it more serious.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that a lot of times we hear about osteoporosis in women, and it does also affect
Happens
men.
in men too. Yeah, it's just more prevalent in women than it is in men. So essentially, bone, bone is made up of different components. You've got organic and inorganic components, and you've got essentially other types of things that make up the matrix. The collagen is the important part of that. And so our bone needs to have healthy bone, we need to have strong bone mass, but we also need to have flexibility. The bone needs to be flexible. And that's a very important thing when it comes to what we'll be talking about, because flexible bone is less likely to break. And that's the more important thing about what we really want to talk to you about. And for us to have healthy bone and have that flexible, healthy bone mass, we need to have an active circus going on, is the best way I can say it. So what has to happen is we have to have a balance of osteoblasts and osteoclasts. We have a buildup of bone, we have a breakdown of bone. When those two things happen simultaneously in balance, then we're going to have the most healthy aspects of bone. And that's where we're going to have the nice flexibility and the solid bone mass. But that's an important figure that we want to really bring up for people. Well, what does it mean when we start having thinner bones? So there's osteopenia, then further on advanced is osteoporosis. But osteopenia is essentially just a thinning of the bone matrix, a thinner, less dense bone. But what happens is we compare this to a young, healthy adult. So osteopenia means that your bone is not as dense as what it used to be when you were younger. And when we start having problems with that, losing that bone, it can continue and advance, and that's when it becomes osteoporotic. So then what will happen is we'll have osteoporosis, which means now we've got an increased fracture risk, and we have basically losing our rigidity or losing our flexibility and becoming more rigid. So we need to have the flexibility, like I said, to have that healthier bone. With ways that we measure these bone mineral densities, there's the kind of the gold standard is what we call a DEXA scan. Basically, that's something that's that dual energy X-ray absorbometry, and that bone then is measured on its thickness level, if you will, is the easiest way to report that. So when our bone starts to thin, then we're going to have problems with our DEXA scan numbers starting to get worse. And they look at the T-score is what typically is noticed on DEXA scans. And these DEXA scans give you, as a background, yes, there's a radiation amount that you have in those, but it's about the amount that we get traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast in an airplane. That's the amount of radiation you typically get. So it's a very small amount, very negligible. Getting those at a younger age is a good thing to do. So we know, are we gaining? Are we losing? Or are we staying the same? So that's an important measure. We want to know where we're at. There's other ways that we measure too. We'll talk about here later on down the line. But that T-score is basically what our measurement is, and it always compares to that young optimal bone. So, and when we talk about osteopenia, that's more of a number that's less than 2.5. So when we get over 2.5 on our DEXA scan, that means that, okay, now we're in the osteoporosis level. So that's where we can start having problems with the fractures, and we're an increased risk.
And I did just want to chime in here. For those of you who may have osteopenia, that does not mean that you are for sure going to go on and then develop osteoporosis.
Absolutely.
But it's good to know so that you can start making the lifestyle changes and working to build that bone back up.
Exactly. It's very important to do that. And you can build bone at any age. You can lose it at about any age too. Some of the studies will show that we can have people that even in their 30s have osteoporosis. So that is something that's measurable.
Which is also, when you think about it, that's also your 30s is when you start losing muscle, which is one of the reasons why we lose bone strength.
Exactly. Basically, statistics there's about 10 million Americans that have osteoporosis. And then there's about another 44 that are going to have lower bone densities, which is the osteopenia. So it's very prevalent. It's quite a common problem that we'll typically see out in the public.
And oftentimes, I'm not sure what I have heard is typically you start having that checked at age 65, just in general regular screenings. But really, we got to think about doing that a little sooner than that.
Yeah, it really needs to be done. You can do it at a younger age so that you can have 2 points. You can't plot a graph. You can't know whether you're getting better or worse if you don't have 2 points. So you need that initial one. And then later on down the line, it's good to look at that too. Menopause or andropause, those are the times that are really important to focus upon. Where am I at? Do I need to do something different? What do I need to do different in my lifestyle, on my diet, et cetera, things like that to improve your bone health. But for the clinical implications for osteoporosis and bone strength, most of the fractures, typically for osteoporosis fractures, are going to occur in the hip, wrist, and spine. Those are areas where typically we'll have osteoporosis, and that's where you'll have the more serious health implications. And when you're looking at a risk of hip fractures, with critical hip fractures, 1 in 2 women will develop fractures potentially, as well as men. It only is 1 in 4. So when we're talking about hip fractures related to osteoporosis, 1 in 2 of those is women, 1 in 4 is men. So you can see it's a little more obvious, a little more prevalent in women.
And then not to mention that when you suffer a hip fracture, really has an impact on your morbidity and mortality.
Right. Yeah, that's where we can start having problems with the sedentary lifestyle. Okay, if you're already sedentary and you have a fracture, you're going to be even more sedentary. And sedentary lifestyle can lead to these problems with developing clots too. But we're going to have, just for frailty, we're going to also have problems with sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting, muscle thinning. So we're going to have weaker muscles, and it takes stronger muscles to build stronger bones. And that'll be part of the topic here later too. But just mortality rates, when we're talking about 30% of adults over the age 65 that develop a hip fracture will perish after having that hip fracture. And that's after the first year. So in 1 year, you're going to be at 30% risk for mortality after hip fracture. And that just essentially doubles in the next year. So as we get older, it gets worse. So the older we get after age 65, if we have a hip fracture, and you're likelihood of dying within 2 years is double that. So it's pretty significant. The modern diagnostic tools, let's talk about how we actually diagnose these types of problems for folks. We mentioned the DEXA scan, which is the gold standard for looking at bone. That's very successful. It's very common. It's very widespread. And actually, it's pretty inexpensive these days. So they're pretty fast, pretty easy to get. It doesn't take a lot of effort either. You essentially just lay down and they take your x-ray, essentially is how it works. So it's a pretty simple process. And we both have had that done too. Other tests, there's a lot of other things too that we can do. We also look at certain other types of testing modalities, looking at our body composition. And that tells us how our bone and muscle components are, essentially. It tells us how dense we are. It's not as good as a DEXA scan. It's a point that tells you if you're doing something right, it's going to improve. And if we're not doing what we need to do, then it could potentially worsen. So that just gives you an idea of where you're at.
And that's like a calculation of your bone mass
right.
And
yeah.
muscle
so
mass.
Those body compositions they can give you a score, but it's really the DEXA scan that's the gold standard for comparison purposes for us. And then there's bone turnover markers that we can look at too. Dr. Doug Lucas and his studies in his clinic, he's doing a lot of work on that right now, looking at basically what's called P1NP to CTX ratios. And it's basically a buildup of, you're looking at the amount of bone you build up and the amount of bone that you're breaking down. And those should be in balance. We're not really There's a lot more studies that need to be done on that, but certainly there's good suggestion that they really need to be in balance, and there's things that we can do to improve that. And even for females, it's very important, I think. Treatment options. What options do we have here? We've got the typical pharmaceutical treatment options, and then we have, the bioidentical hormone replacement options. These are the treatments with the pharmaceuticals. They will essentially inhibit osteoclast activity. So that means it slows down the bone breakdown. Now, remember when I said at the beginning, it's important to have a balance. We have to have the buildup and the breakdown to have the healthy bone that has the good flexibility. When you alter that, then you can start to create problems with more brittle bone. It may not be healthy bone, but it may be more brittle, and that is not necessarily always good either. So that's something to remember, but it's an option. Those are the bisphosphonates like Fosamax and Boniva. Those are common ones. And there's the SERMs, the selective estrogen receptor modulators. Those are like Evista, and some newer medications like Evenity and Prolia. But some of those are injectables, and you can't be on those forever. For instance, Evenity, that's one that you can only do for a year, and then you got to move on to something else. So there are toxicities that come with those. There are risks associated with those.
And that's why it's so important to know what you can do from a lifestyle and supplement standpoint to really stack the deck in your favor.
And then bioidentical hormone replacement. Some great studies that show that this is really an optimal way to improve bone health and quality of bone and flexibility. We're talking about testosterone, estrogen, even thyroid, but those and progesterone, those levels, if we can optimize our hormone levels, then we're going to not only maintain bone, but probably even build bone. And if you couple that with a proper diet and exercise routine, the lifestyle changes, it's going to really set you off good for being in good shape when we get older.
So for prevention and treatment strategies, or more prevention strategies, the things that you need to do that you can do just at home and your everyday. Supplementation wise, everyone thinks that bones need calcium, and the truth is you do need calcium, but a supplement of calcium is not really necessary. Yeah. However, vitamin D is a great one to add, and so many people are deficient in vitamin D.
It's incredible that we see so many people that come in on low end of the spectrum with vitamin D levels, and it's because we are indoor people. We are not outdoor hunters and gatherers like we used to do 100, 200 years ago. So it's changed things. It's changed our bone. And I even heard some podcasts that talked about, it's an interesting thing that they took an old burial where they had dug up the bones. They had to move these bones, and they did DEXA scans on them, and they compared them to today's people with DEXA scans. And they showed a significant change of about 300% difference in the components of the bone, and even an increase in lead. Lead is something that's interesting too, that also affects bone. So I just heard that. It's not something that I wanted to bring that up, actually. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. And I think just real quick while we're talking about vitamin D, because this has come up recently, the level for vitamin D for normal ranges is like 30 to 100. And really, you want to be on the higher end of that. Vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin, so you can overdo it, but it takes a lot to overdo it. You need to be at a level of like 250 to get vitamin D toxicity. It would be great if you could be around 100.
Yeah.
Vitamin D.
It's very important for calcium absorption, bone health, and also hormone health too for vitamin D. But vitamins A, D, E, and K are very important for calcium deposition in the bone. And then, of course, you've got estradiol, progesterone, testosterone, and thyroid replacement. Those are also very important things.
Yeah, when indicated, for sure. Exercise recommendation. We've talked a lot about this, but lift heavy things.
You can't drive that home enough. There's nothing going to build bone any better than good, healthy muscle. And when you're trying to build healthy muscle, you're also stimulating your bone. You're also bending that bone. You want to bend the bone. You want to stimulate the bone. You want to do what you can do for your own body to repair, build up, and replace the old bone. That's the key.
So impact is the other thing that can help
jumping up and down off boxes, lifting heavy things like you said. That's so important farmers carry, lifting stuff and carrying it for long distances is really good for a lot of bone health.
And then the eccentric exercises too, I think is good.
And those are really good for muscle improvement. The eccentric exercises will help build those muscles that are important for you when you're going down a stairs, or if you start to fall, you can catch yourself and keep yourself from getting hurt. Those are the type 2 fast muscle fibers that we really need to work on. And those are the ones where you build those up with explosive hit exercises, high intensity interval training exercises, and heavy lifting. Any type of resistance training, whether bands or weights, do something.
Even body weight.
Absolutely.
I mean, really,
body weight is
a great start.
Absolutely good. Absolutely. And then, of course, it doesn't go without saying that lifestyle modifications, stopping your smoking and alcohol, those things directly affect our bones too. You can't get away from that. And just maintaining a good, healthy weight. That's also very important.
And then your little tidbit of information is vision and hearing correction. So make sure that you can see where you're going so you don't fall, or so that you can hear when something's coming so that you can get out of the way.
Right.
Something that you don't really think about.
Yeah, you don't think about that, but that is
totally makes sense.
Yeah. So make sure you get your glasses, make sure you can see, make sure you can hear. And of course, there's support groups that are out there too. I think it would be a good idea for folks to meet other people that also are maybe in a osteoporotic problem. So there's other folks that out there have osteoporosis than just us. And there's other people that want and need to build bone and muscle too. Support groups are very good for those types of things. And we had personal dealings with elderly relatives that have fallen and breaking a hip and unfortunately succumbed to that. So it's not something that people can avoid. It's around you. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have had relatives or themselves and maybe have had trouble with it. And if you're young, you can have the fracture and still have the muscle stamina and strength to build yourself up and build your endurance back up again. But to really you really want to avoid a fracture is what it really boils down to.
And there's so many things that you can do. We've talked about them here, but you can avoid it as long as you're proactive and you know where you're at. And
the key takeaway from today's podcast is just to be proactive. Do what you can do to keep what bone you have and to build as much bone as you can get. It's like banking bone. You want to bank muscle and bank bone. And that's going to give you the best overall outcome to have a healthy, long, healthy life.
And it's never too late. So remember that too.
All right. So if you have any questions, have any comments, want to share some stories, reach out to us and have a great, healthy day.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Rev Up Health. We hope you're leaving with some valuable insights to supercharge your health journey.
Don't forget to follow or subscribe to Rev Up Health wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating and review.
Have a topic you want us to explore? Reach out to us on social media channels. We love hearing from our wellness community.
Until next time, keep thriving, and remember, your journey to health is a journey to a better you.
Stay well, and we'll connect with you again soon. This is Tandy.
And this is Dr. Mark, signing off from Rev Up Health. Take care.
The information provided in this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. The content is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a patient and their healthcare provider. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your healthcare regimen, including diet, exercise, or treatment plans. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Revelation Health and Wellbeing.